Have you ever imagined a leader soldiers obey without question because hesitation meant death? A man who smiled while taking lives, danced after executions, and toasted to the screams of his victim. A figure of pure brutality, a man of laughter in daylight and terror in the night. History doesn't just remember him, it fears him. His name is Idi Amin. He was born in Koboko in the northern western corner of Uganda, sometimes around 1925, though no one can actually say for sure. Even his date of birth was uncertain, like a secret that refused to stand still. His mother, Aza Ate, was an herbalist and a spiritual woman, very strong, respected, and feared. She belonged to the Kwakwa tribe, a small ethnic group near the borders of Sudan and Congo. His father, Amin Dada, was said to have been a farmer and a follower of Islam, but they left when Idi was still a child. So the boy grew under the firm hands of his mother in poverty, in heat, in the long quiet of the Ugandan north. They say he was tall even as a child and that he loved to fight. But more than anything, he loved to be obeyed. He didn't go far in school. Some say it's only 3 or 4 years of basic education before he dropped out. He couldn't read or write, but he could command, he could intimidate, and he could win. When the British colonial army came recruiting for strong young men to serve the King African Rifles, Amin was quick to join. He was barely 20, but already built like a giant. The British saw in him a man who followed orders without question, the perfect soldier, and so began the making of Idi Amin Dada, the man who would learn discipline from the empire and later use it to destroy his own people. He served in Burma during the World War II, later in Kenya, helping the British suppress the Mau Mau rebellion, a brutal campaign against Africans who dared to demand freedom. For the British, Amin was loyal. For the Africans, he was feared. And when Uganda gained independence in 1962, Amin was already a senior officer, very tall, strong, and ambitious, with medals pinned to his chest and darkness growing behind his smile. The new president, Milton Obote, trusted him completely. Together they rose, the politician and the soldier. But friendship is very fragile in the shadow of ambition. And while Obote governed, Amin built an army of his own, loyal only to him. Behind the laughter, the jokes and the charm, Amin was learning the taste of power. And power once tasted, never let go. It was January 25th, 1971. Tanks rolled through Kampala at dawn. Radios cracked across the capital. The army has taken control. General Idi Amin Dada is now the head of state. Milton Obote, Uganda's first prime minister and the man who had trusted Amin as his military chief, was away at a Commonwealth conference. By the time he returned, his friend has become his enemy. Crowd filled the streets. Soldiers fired celebratory rounds into the sky. Uganda cheered, at least for a moment. To many, Amin looked like a savior. The smiling general who danced, joked in public, and promised to restore dignity. Wore a uniform heavy with medals and spoke of love for my people. He told them, "I am your brother, your father, and your protector." But within weeks, the music of freedom faded into the rhythm of fear. Amin's first move was to purge the army. Officers loyal to Obote were dragged from their beds, accused of treason, and executed. Files disappeared, bodies vanished, and whispers replaced laughter. The state's research bureau, its secret police, was born. The bureau headquarters, a pale building in Nakasero Road, soon earned a name among locals: the House of Pain. Behind the walls, men and women were tortured, electrocuted, and beaten. Only few were able to come out alive. Amin ruled through chaos and enjoyed it. He would summon ministers to meetings, hand them drinks, laugh with them, then signal soldiers to take them away. Hours later, those same ministers will be found floating in the Nile. He played tribes against each other, favoring his own Kakwa and Nubian clans, while targeting others he suspected of plotting. Thousands from the Akoli and Langi group were wiped out in revenge for Obote's past support. And yet on radio, Amin still joked. He danced traditional numbers at state events. He staged boxing matches against his own guards, declaring himself champion of Uganda. But behind the laughter grew madness. He began giving himself titles: His Excellency, President for Life, Field Marshal, Al-Hajj Doctor, Idi Amin Dada, VC, DSO, MC, Lord of all the beasts of the earth and fishes of the sea, and Conqueror of the British Empire. To the world, it was absurd. To Ugandans, it was deadly. Every new title came with fresh paranoia and new griefs. He turned against educated class, accusing doctors, professors, and lawyers of conspiring with foreigners. Many fled the country, others were executed. Uganda's brightness mind vanished overnight. In 1972, Amin made one of his most shocking decisions: the expulsion of Haitians. Roughly 60,000 people of Indian and Pakistani descent who had lived in Uganda for generations. He accused them of sabotaging the economy and milking Uganda's wealth. They were given 90 days to leave. Businesses collapsed, banks emptied, and factories shut down. Within months, Uganda's economy, once one of Africa's strongest, was crippled. But Amin didn't care. He had something more intoxicating than prosperity, and that was absolute control. And with each act of cruelty, he wanted the world to notice. He taunted Britain, mocked Israel, flirted with Libya's Gaddafi, and promised to liberate Africa from Western hands. Yet in private, fear consumed him. He slept in different houses each night, changed cars constantly, and surrounded himself with armed guards who were just as terrified as the people they protected him from. They say sometimes he would wake up at night screaming, haunted by the faces he would order killed. But by morning, the laughter returned. The man of jokes by day had become a nightmare by night. By 1973, Uganda was no longer a country. It was a kingdom of fear. The streets of Kampala fell silent after sunset. People whispered when they spoke the president's name, as if even the walls had ears. No one knew who would vanish next: a teacher, a doctor, a soldier, a student. The State's Research Bureau, the Public Safety Unit, and the army itself became instruments of death. Trucks moved through the night, and in the morning, the Nile River would carry the bodies downstream. It was estimated that between 300,000 and 500,000 Ugandans were murdered during Idi Amin's rule. An entire generation erased. He killed with purpose and sometimes without any. One night, he accused a group of ministers of betrayal. They were gathered at the presidential lodge for dinner. He laughed, raised a glass, toasted to their loyal service, then gave a silent nod. Soldiers entered, guns ready. When the echo of bullets faded, Amin kept eating. To him, death was not an act, it was a habit. They say he often visited execution grounds personally. He would smile, wave at soldiers, and sometimes even order the band to play music as men were shot. To his soldiers, obedience was survival. One delay, one hesitation, one question, and you will join the line of the condemned. He killed judges who ruled against him, executed officers who doubted him, and replaced experienced commanders with loyal but untrained tribesmen. The army turned from an institution into a cult, worshipping fear itself. And while the nation bled, Amin surrounded himself with luxury, imported cars, French suits, palace filled with gold. He built swimming pools for himself and mass graves for his enemies. He took wives, at least five, and many lovers. When one of them, Amin, was found dead and mutilated, a body hidden in a hospital freezer, whispers spread that the president himself had ordered a date. He denied it, laughed about it, then went on to the television to say, "I love all my wives equally." Behind his laughter was a growing madness. He started speaking to invincible people, claiming that God appeared to him in dreams and gave him orders. He would call meetings at midnight, accuse his own generals of sorcery, and have them executed the next morning. No one could predict his mood. He could shake your hand today and bury you tomorrow. One soldier who escaped later said, Amin didn't need reason to kill. He only needed silence. Uganda's hospital had no medicine. School lost their teachers. Market stood empty. Inflation soared, but Amin only grew fatter, happier, and louder. He renamed himself as President for Life. In 1975, he hosted the Organization of African Unity, the OAU Summit in Kampala, a desperate attempt to look respected to the continent. He strutted in a white uniform, waving to cheering crowds as if the blood on his hands could be washed away by applause. But even his allies began to see the truth. Behind the jokes, the medals, and the fake charisma, Uganda had become a graveyard. And as the world watched in disbelief, Amin paranoia turned outward. His next enemy wasn't inside Uganda anymore, it was across the border. The monster he had built was ready to devour more than just his own people. By 1978, Idi Amin had ruled Uganda for 7 long, bloody years. The laughter was gone, and jokes that once filled the airways had turned into whisper of survivor. He was no longer the hero who danced before the crowd. He was a man haunted by ghosts he couldn't name. Every night, he changed houses. Every morning, he looked in the mirror and saw enemies instead of his reflection. Then came the final mistake, the war that would end him. In October 1978, Amin accused Tanzania of harboring rebels and launched an invasion across the border. He declared war as if he were conquering destiny itself. Soldiers, untrained and terrified, crossed into the Kagera region, waving flags and looting villages. But Amin had underestimated the quiet strength of his neighbors. President Julius Nyerere responded with calm precision. Within weeks, the Tanzanian army, joined by Uganda exiles, struck back. The war was brutal, but it was also poetic. The same soldiers who once killed for Amin now turned their guns against him. As Tanzanian forces advanced towards Kampala, Amin made broadcast after broadcast on radios, boasting of victories even as his empire collapsed around him. He promised to meet the invaders on the battlefield. But when the shells began to fall on the capital, Idi Amin, the self-proclaimed conqueror of the British Empire, ran. On April 11, 1979, Tanzania and Uganda rebel forces entered Kampala. Crowds poured into the streets, crying, laughing, singing after 8 years of silence. Uganda finally had a voice again. The palaces Amin built were empty, his cars abandoned, his portraits torn from the wall in the underground cell of the State Research Bureau. Bodies still hung from the hooks. The final testimony of his rule. Amin fled first to Libya, then to Saudi Arabia, under the protection of 2 old allies who no longer believed in his holiness but respected his silence. There in exile, he lived quietly, the lion turned ghost. He still wore his medals, still called himself president of Uganda, but the world had moved on. He spent his days watching television, drinking, and reminiscing about the power he once held. When journalists found him in Jeddah, they were shocked. The man who once ordered execution with a smile now spoke softly, almost kindly. He told them, "I don't regret anything. Everything I did was for Uganda. In 2003, Idi Amin Dada died in a Saudi hospital, not by gun, not by rope, but by failure. No trial, no justice, just silence. But for the people of Uganda, his ghost remain. In every scars, every missing father, every story whispered at night, the man who once fed on fear was finally swallowed by it. And there was a particular report that even claimed that he actually wanted to be buried back at home. But the people of Uganda said no, that he was not going to be buried at home. So what do you think about Idi Amin? This man was really, really brutal when he was alive. But no justice. He lived his life until death took him. So what's your thought about him? What do you think about him? Let me know in the comment section.
So this is the story according to the West, but I can tell you that there is more to this story. And I'm going to be making another video in which I'm going to be explaining some deep things, some things that were hidden about Idi Amin. In as much as this is what is actually on the internet, I can tell you that there is more to this man, and we are going to be discussing more about the war, the Kagari war, the Tanzanian war, and the Ugandan war, where we are actually going to be relating things with facts and figures, because this is actually what it was painted as, but we are actually going to look in depth into the real man that Idi Amin is. Because if you know much about him, let me know what you think in the comment section. See you in the next. What story do you know about Idi Amin?